of VillageTown, Claude Lewenz.
Thank you, Dan. I'm going to start with a video, but I thought I would first explain a little bit about it. Stuart Udall was a congressman, and then he became Secretary of the Interior under Kennedy first and Johnson presidents, and he was responsible for the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, the Wilderness Act, 4 national parks, 50 national reserves, probably one of the most effective and powerful conservationists of the second half of the 20th century. So I wrote and said I'd like to come and videotape you, and I sent him a copy of the book. And when I got there, he said the reason he agreed is because of what was in the book. And he said, this is very important. He says, you're young enough to accomplish it. You must do it. And that's so heartening. And so this is a 45 minutes worth of recording, and I've clipped about 2 minutes of it that I'd like to start with.
I was 34 years of age when I was elected to Congress. I was junior congressman, of course, so I had very little influence. But I recall that Albert Gore from Tennessee, a senator, was the sponsor of the Interstate Highway Program. I did not participate in the debate. There were very few questions asked. Where was this leading us? Did we have enough petroleum to last not 100 years? The idea was the proponents of the Interstate Highway Program, this is going to be the American system. And there was very little debate. There was no debate. There was kind of an aura that, well, we have unlimited oil and this is a good idea. It's fascinating that Al Gore Jr. Became the leading advocate of saying we've gone too far. So it's been a fascinating period for someone who went to Congress when he was 34, and now I come out and I'm advising my children that they are inheriting a different world, and their world is think small, walk a lot, build transportation systems that encourage people to walk, break up your cities into smaller parts, and that's the way you're going to solve the problem that the United States has today. This is a revolution when you look back on it, compared with 1956, when we passed the Interstate Highway Program.
Probably one of the most powerful things about this is that these were the elders passing on to the next generation their knowledge. And that's something we don't have very often anymore. So the first part of this conversation is one where it's about developing awareness. And what I want to do is develop awareness of village towns. For the past 50 years, since 1956, we've been building communities for the wrong reason. We've been building them to sell cars. We've been building them to sell petroleum, and we've been building them to boom an economy. And that was done because that generation came out of a depression, and they were totally focused on the economy. It was tough. For 11 years, it was a very, very hard way to live. And so the World War II pulled them out of that depression. And when it pulled them out of that depression, it was, what can we do to keep ourselves out of this? And so they came up with a new reason to build communities, one that had never been done before, one in which people served policy instead of policy serving people. And that was to build communities to sell cars. As Stuart Udall had said, there was an aura about it. No one asked the questions. No one examined the unanticipated side effects that might happen. Now we're suffering those. And so it's now time to find a new model. Now, I got into this in a very curious way. I wasn't very happy with what was on offer. I found that I was spending too much time in my car. I found our children, we had to look after them. They had to be in our sight, or somebody had to be paid to look after them, or somebody trusted. That wasn't the childhood that I grew up with. And so I started looking for that. And when I found that it didn't exist, I concluded, in that case, we have to build it. And it started fairly small. I found there are other people who share this hollowness. And when the first edition of the book came out, there was a review written. And it was a review that I've quoted because it's so powerful. And I'd just like to read the last bit of it. For many years, I've been praying for village life. With 3 children under 6, stuck in a tiny box in suburbia, I was so lonely I thought my heart would break. I was lost in the needs of my children, and there was no outlet, much less anyone, to share the joys and burden of mothering. And so many of us are finding this, that the suburban way of life is not fulfilling. So, if we started over, if we swept all the preconceptions and ideas off the table, where would we begin? Now that's what I did, and that was the approach that we took. Most people who try and work with these problems start by seeing how we can fix it. Our problem right now is that cars are polluting, so let's make cars that don't pollute and make cars that use less petroleum, or maybe they use renewable energy. But we're still separating people if we do that. If you get old and lose your license to drive, you still have to move to a retirement home. So start with this question, why should we build communities? And as I looked into that, what I found was surprisingly the answer had been put forth 2,300 years ago by Aristotle. And Aristotle wrote, when several villages come together to become self-supporting, or nearly so, the purpose of its continuance, which they called the city-state, is to enable its citizens to enjoy a good life. And a good life is understood as the social pursuits of conviviality, citizenship, artistic and intellectual growth, and spiritual development and fulfillment. And as I looked at that, I have to say I couldn't find any better explanation since then of why we should build communities. We start with that as the purpose, not to sell cars, not to boom the economy, not to achieve other policy objectives, but rather to enable the citizens of that community to enjoy a good life. So then we get to a question, well, what's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? How do you do it? And what do you call it? You'll see in the first book we said, for now, we don't know, so we're just calling it a village. And eventually it emerged that we call it a village town. We need that because you don't want to confuse it with other intentional communities. It's not co-housing. It's not an eco-village. It's not transition towns. It's not a gated community. It is intended to be a replacement for suburbs. That what we're intending to say is build no more suburbs. Build no more shopping malls. Build no more office parks, and no more of the suburban sprawl that has just taken over America and is now taking over the world. I was looking at a magazine. Even in Switzerland, it's happening. Couldn't believe it. It's happening all over the world, and they desperately need another alternative. The first question is, what size? What is this going to look like? And there we found we had two conflicting needs. The first is economic. You need what's called a critical mass. 5,000 to 10,000 people is what you need. When I need a watch band, I go to a fellow, and he said, when he learned what I did, he said, well, that's interesting, because when I was in school, they trained us that you need 5,000 people to support a watchmaker. So if you got a village, you're going to have to drive to the watchmaker. So this doesn't work. How many people do you need to support a bookstore? And the bookstore guy said 7,500 is what he was taught. Now, it is interesting that in England, you can have a community of 200 people, and they will have one church, one general store, and two pubs. The next conflicting part is that you want to live in a village. And a village is a social place where it's face-to-face, where you know everyone, where everyone knows you, and when you need help, they're there to help. And it was an interesting study done in England where they said how many people would like to live in villages, and 25% of the population said they wanted to live in a village environment. How do you resolve this, that you want a face-to-face community, but you can't run businesses there? You can't make a living there. The old villages worked because the businesses were the farms surrounding them, and we no longer have that kind of an economy. And so the solution we found is what we call a village town, a town made of villages. And the idea is that you would build a urban core, let's say 150 acres, and in that you have 20 villages side by side. Each of those villages has roughly 500 people, which if there are 20 of them, that gives you your 10,000 population. We also, in an ideal one, would have a 300-acre green belt around it. So the green belt is double the size of the urban core, and then you also really should have an industrial park so that you make things, and I'll talk more about that later. Now, realistically, we're talking about something like that, if it was done in Northern California, that's going to have a market value of $1 to $2 billion. So we're talking about a big project. We're talking about one that would inject hundreds of millions of dollars a year into the local and regional economy, but would have no adverse environmental or social effects. So then we start looking and asking, if we want to do this different, and we want to do it so we avoid the problems of our car-based society, that was what we've created now, what's it going to look like? What are some of the distinguishing features? So the first thing you're looking for is that you want it to be human-scaled, which means that you want no cars within the urban core. Now, this is a lovely little town in Mallorca where they do allow cars. And I was there 2 weeks ago because they want to do a village town project in Mallorca. And they've actually now have a village steward, this village town steward similar to John, who's going to be doing that. But it was very interesting going for a cup of coffee and then having these cars invading it. It just doesn't work. Christopher Alexander puts it succinctly: cars turn towns into mincemeat. And when you attempt to domesticate the car, it doesn't work. You have to keep it out, and you have to design a human-scaled. The next one is that you want a 24/7 community, no outbound commuters. So that means that you have to create the work within the community as opposed to having that people have to go out to work. The third one, sustainability. That's very important here, that sustainability is not a bragging point. We see right now the latest and hottest in development is to say we're car-free, waste-free, and carbon-free, as if that is all you have to be. And there's a place in Abu Dhabi, Masdar City, where that's what they're bragging. They say they'll be the first in the world. And I said, well, actually, I think Athens in 300 BC met that criteria. But we remember them for their philosophy, for their music, for their art, for their democracy. We do not remember it because they were car-free. Sustainability in a rational society is something we do. But we don't want to put that forward and think if we've done that, we've done the job. The details of it, it's medium density attached housing. This is one of the things, if somebody wants to live on the quarter-acre section with their own house, that's not a village town. It is attached housing. However, we've recognized it's not row housing, because row housing is thin and deep and dark, and it has conflict zones at the front and back. But if you turn it 90 degrees, and it's wide and well lit, and you have a separation from your neighbors, it works. So we're talking 2 to 3 story in most of the village town attached housing. Now the next distinguishing feature, and a very important one, is control of the local economy. That, by the way, is a $100 trillion banknote, and you can buy them on eBay for $5. But it was legal tender. So one of the characteristics here is that if you're talking about, say, 10,000 people, 2.5 people, so you're talking about 4,000 mortgages. Why do you give those to Bank of America or some other big bank? It makes an awful lot more sense to start your own bank, combine those mortgages. The pension funds do want to buy them as long-term investments. And then you are controlling your own economic destiny when you, as a community, own your own bank. So the next is control of the food supply, buying local. Now, I understand in this county, one of the problems right now is the farmers are really suffering. And the reason they're suffering is because the middlemen are driving the prices down and making it harder and harder to make a go of it. If you put a village town in the middle of a farm district, you go to the farmers and buy the development rights so that you protect your food forever and they get an instant cash infusion. You then contract with them to feed the village town 3 meals a day for as long as that one is going to stay there, for hundreds of years. And then you say to them, in 1950, the farmer got 44 cents of the plate that you eat, and now it's 19 cents. And we say, okay, we'll put you back to 44 cents. 6 cents for local delivery, and the village town citizens pay half the price for the food. But there's a catch. We don't want you to be growing for yield. So we don't want you to be chemically farming and all of that other stuff they're doing that has nothing to do with health, nourishment, or flavor. It has to do with the pressure that they're under. The next is controlling the cost of living by combining purchasing power, and there are 2 features here. First is it's always cheaper to save $1 than it is to earn one, because you don't have to work for it and you don't have to pay tax on it. So if you got 10,000 people and you combine their purchasing power, you've got a pretty big wholesale buying group. But we didn't develop it for that reason. We developed it because when you're buying at that level, you can specify the packaging, so you don't get stuff you don't know what we don't want trash. All we want is surplus resources that we can reuse. So we'll specify the packaging. The other thing is we want to buy things that last, that don't break. And so that is another negotiating point you can do when you have 10,000 buyers. The next distinguishing feature is that we make things, that we build an industrial zone. Right now, in America, a great deal of the manufacturing has been moved overseas to Asia. It's very important that we actually make things in the community, in industrial zone, that's a walk-to industrial zone. And the other thing to remember is that some of those things, we're going to be building 4,000 houses, spending about $1 billion. So there are quite a few businesses that can actually get funded from the very beginning by having local contracts. And then what they have is a plan that says, right, once we've done that, our machinery is paid for, all our systems are paid for, and now we start marketing this, and we sell what we call global from local. So it's local to global that brings money in. Next distinguishing feature is that it's social, that it is for all ages and stages of life. And it's a place for all. One of the most important things is that this match the regional or national demographics. Most of these similar things, when they do them, end up being places for the upper middle class, the comfortable class, I think it was called. Because they go, oh, this is a beautiful place, I love it, and they drive the prices up. So we've developed what we call parallel real estate markets to assure that at all times we maintain a full breadth. And a very simple explanation of that is if you're a teacher and teachers make an average of $50,000, you can't afford a house for more than $200,000. So we effectively say we'll lose money on that house. We'll sell that to a teacher for $200,000. When they go to sell it, they can sell it for any price, but only to another teacher. And what that does is it establishes a market that is independent of the salary range of, say, the bond traders on New York who make $1 billion a year. They can't buy that house because it's not available to them. And when we talk about the ages and stages of life, another one, a big one, is for the baby boomers. Now, I've had the very painful experience of putting both my grandfather and my father into a nursing home. And he was isolated. And it was very hard to visit. Right now, my mother is doing everything she can to stay in her house, and the systems are not helping at all. As soon as she can't drive anymore, it's pretty much over. In a village town, you don't have that situation because you don't drive. You don't need to drive. Next feature, education. It really does take a village to raise the child. So what we do is we put the classrooms in the village rather than on a separate campus. If possible, we want to use public education. I'm a strong believer in public education, but it needs to be changed. There's nothing that changes it faster than having the parents and the other adults in the community seeing what's going on in the classroom because it's right next to them. That instead of a cafeteria, they go to the cafe on the plaza for lunch and they interact with the adults. And the adults get to know them, so when they're a teenager, they'll offer them a job. And there's a very gradual progress for them to integrate into that society. And one of the parallel market homes is one for anyone under 25 years old. So you build houses. You can live in there as long as you want. When you go sell it, the buyer has to be under 25, and they have to prove, one, they earned the money legally, and two, the parents didn't give it to them. If those two criteria are met, that housing will always stay low because at age 25 you just don't earn a great deal. Next feature, attracting and keeping the creative class. I don't know if any of you have read the books of Richard Florida. He's the one who coined the term the creative class. And the creative class are the artists, the actors, the musicians, the sculptors, the filmmakers, but they're also the inventors, the scholars, the scientists, the engineers. And we propose to actually build a artist guild hall on each plaza. You know how when you have a gated golfing community, the golf course is paid for by the sale of the houses. We're not going to build a golf course, but we will build this cultural enrichment part. And then you go further. The roads have to turn, so where they turn, you have to have a house that isn't square, it isn't rectangular. It's going to be trapezoidal. So what we said is, okay, well, we'll put apartments on those curves, and then if you're a member of the guild hall, you get that rent-free. And if you don't want to live in it, you can rent it out and keep the compensation, but that way we provide guaranteed housing for 5% of the population, the artists. None of this is free, because people don't respect things that are free. What this is an exchange. It says, we give you this, and what we want you to do is your art. Finally, we have the role of sacred architecture. And in sacred architecture, no matter whether you are a believer or not a believer, there is a very important role that is played by a particular kind of a design that creates peace, that creates calmness. If you are religious, it's a church, it's a mosque, it's a temple. If you're not, it's a place for rites of passage. And so we use the term church and we use the term cathedral not to refer to a particular religion, but rather to refer to an archetype. So on the plaza you might have a small chapel or a church, but in the town hall, the town center, there you're going to need the large cathedral, the big one, so that when you have births, coming of age, marriages, deaths, the rites of passage, that this is a place that is honored. It should be noted that a village town has no religious, political, or ideological affiliation. It is not green, It is not red, it is not blue, or whatever the next color is. As I said, we're seeking to bring all of it together. The thing it is, however, is hopefully smart, rational, not insane. Because when you look at a lot of what we're doing, it's madness. It's absolute madness what we do. Now, one of the other distinguishing characteristics of this is that we turn real estate development upside down. Instead of starting with the land and then go to the supervisors of the local government and say we want to rezone it, and then you put in what you need to and sell, we do it completely opposite. We start by going to you. We start by saying, we will have 20 villages. Each one is different. And we look for a person who says, I've spent my whole life preparing for this. This is what I want my village to look like. The look, the feel, what we call the theme of it. And they connect with and attract 200 families, 500 people, whatever the number is. They attract that. And those people say, we want to live there. Now, we don't have land yet. These people want to live in something that exists in another realm, the intelligible realm. That's where they want to live. We know it's Northern California. We'd love it if it's Sonoma County, but we don't have any land picked out. Now think about the power of this. What happens when we have 200 families, 1,000 families, people saying that's where we want to be? And you then go to the supervisors and say, we'd like to have a conversation with you. We've got these people, they want to do $1 billion project at a time when nothing's happening in development right now. It has no adverse effects at all. It's going to contribute to your economy. Where should it be? Well, that's going to probably get a welcome response. The first thing is we need those people. And we need them because they're going to design their community. And how can you design a community that for the people who are going to live there if they're not there? So we turn the whole thing upside down. We start with the people. We then go and we get the political will to support it. And then we have them find the land. And finally, we put the utilities in and actually build it. So, where are we right now? This is the end of the first part of the presentation where I've introduced a new word. And the new word is VillageTown. And the objective we have, the whole objective I had this month and the objective for the rest of this year is going to be get people conversant with this new word called VillageTown. And now it's time to just talk about some of the process in this, because it's one thing to have a good idea, but has the detail been worked out? When we go in front of local officials, when we go in front of investors, have we figured out structurally how you do this? We're looking at $1 to $2 billion in capital investment. We're probably talking 4,000 homes, 1,000 workplaces, plus an industrial park. Now, what's interesting about this is the funding of this, as I think I might have mentioned, is this concept called purchasing power. So you need a little bit of capital investment in the beginning. And you've got to go out and find that, and that's my job to do that, is find that. But once we found that investment, the major one is setting up this bank, qualifying everybody for mortgages, and in effect putting together 4,000 bridge loans into one single package. Now, let's talk a little bit about the village and what it looks like. So here I have a badly drawn map, and if we have anyone who can volunteer to do better drawing, we'll be delighted. But what you have is a green field that surrounds the village itself, and this is something that prevents cross-boundary conflicts. When you say not in my backyard, it's very easy. When you have that thick a green belt around it, it isn't in your backyard. You don't see it, you don't hear it. Also, there's going to be very little traffic. There are no commuters going out. So that usual concern you have about environmental impact, the most traffic is probably going to be people coming in who think it's so cool that they want to see it, as opposed to commuters going out. The Greenbelt has various things like festival fields, exercise parks, equestrian and farm animals, village gardens, open fields. It will have a graveyard. It should have fields of flowers. And you note how we have the quiet stuff in one side, and then it kind of moves over to sort of the higher activity on the other, which is closer to the industrial zone. Now, when you get inside, you have all of these plazas, and it's very important to understand, when we did the research, we found the plaza was where everything happened. That was the life. That was the theater. And you go to communities in Europe and you will see that's where it happens, as long as they don't allow cars. As soon as you allow cars on it, it dies. It becomes a parking lot. So we have 20 villages around neighborhood plazas. Everything is within a 10-minute walk, or it can be a 2-hour labyrinth. It should have a noise overlay, so if you want to live in the quieter area as I do, it will be different than the louder. The youth zone should be near the industrial area, because the youth originally were going to be everywhere, and they said, actually, we'd like to have our own zone because we want to do dancing in the streets. We want to have climbing walls. We want to, we're noisier than our parents. And so we want to be where it doesn't bother anybody. And so you see this overlay, and there'll be other overlays such as smell and visuals and whatever the local land dictates. Now, when we get to the plazas, this is where the public life occurs. What we found is if it's a wine district, the climate's good. And it's very interesting, except for one proposal in New England. Every other one we're looking at around the world, Hunter Valley in Australia, Matakana in New Zealand, Mallorca, and the Napa-Sonoma area is famous for its vineyards. And part of the idea here is you can spend a lot more time outdoors than you can in Maine, for example. So, but I will say, if we do it in a cold climate, you put the houses, the back of the houses closer together, and you do what's called a winter walk. So you actually cover that with glass or something, and that is solar heated so that you can walk in a shirt sleeve like this to an arboretum that is going to be warm even if it's below zero outside. Now, what's on the plaza? Well, one of the things we have is the workplace. So the small office. And there are many different types, but ultimately one of the things that's making a difference is what is now called telepresence, the ability to be in two places at once. You now can perform medical operations in the LA Medical Center on a patient who is in Africa. And so we're seeing a change in that people can be in two places at once, and this is an extremely important part of making the local economy work. Now, the next part of that local economy are turning the money so that, for example, if you have the cafe, if I earn my money outside in the global, I spend it locally. And our objective is to get it spent at least 5 times, that money is turned. It's called the multiplier effect as well. Now, there are interesting options that we give you. For example, conviviality. When you go to a cafe here, generally you're sitting out, you're enjoying yourself, and then the person who's waiting on you comes up and says, "Can I get you something more?" With the very strong hint that if I can't, would you mind giving up the table so we can keep making a living at this? And that isn't that great a solution. And so what happens if the community decides, well, actually, we'll pay for the cafe, we'll pay for the tables, and then we will rent those for $1 a year. And the criteria for that rental is you have to have the lowest cost, the most fantastic food and drink that we can get for that. It has to be really, really good. Well, they don't have the overhead problem anymore, because that, like the guild hall, is something we fund out of the house sales. Now, that is decided by each village individually, because it's going to add a little bit to the price of your house. Do you want to do that, or do you just want to let somebody set up a cafe? So when we have that kind of cafe, that al fresco living, it then provides a place, and this is especially important for older people. On the cafe, on the plaza, we're going to have a nursing care facility, so that the idea is you can go from birth to death in this community. No matter how much your disability, you can stay in your community. And if you're in a wheelchair and you've had a stroke and it's very hard to communicate, you can still be wheeled to the cafe, and the people will know you for who you are. They'll remember you, and they'll treat you completely differently than an underpaid, overworked staff that's working in a nursing home. And so this is a much more humane way to do that. And again, it all fits together. The next part of the plaza is that it generally results in a 30-minute commute. 2 minutes to get home and 28 minutes to talk to people. And in this photograph here, it was extraordinary to see. It went on for half an hour, and it kept changing. As somebody would come up, somebody would leave, and it was this rolling conversation that occurred. And I would suspect they have that every single night. This is simply part of their life. And it sure beats sitting in the car, listening to National Public Radio or Truth Radio or the ball game. It's just a really different way to live. It does take the village to raise the child. And when you have all generations there, it relieves huge pressure on the parents. It's very, very difficult to raise children alone. One of the things about the plaza for teens is that life is visible. It's harder to get into trouble if you're a young person if your activity is one that is visible to the rest of the community. And so you find, and this especially you'll find in Europe, that the kids go down to the plaza. That's where they hang out. It's a totally different experience than hanging out at the mall. And I highly recommend, if you haven't, do research. I'm sure you can get it as a tax deduction to go to Europe, to go to some of these wonderful villages. It also provides settled work that's done for the love of it. When you get to a certain age, you don't need to be supporting children anymore, but retirement benefits just aren't there. You need to have a little bit of a side. And so this gentleman is making tin cups. Somebody else bakes the best apple pie you've ever had. These are the kind of work that's done by elders, and this is going to become more important as we slowly cut away the purchasing power that elders have now. We're going to have a situation, any of you who are baby boomers here are going to have to think about the problem when you start cashing in. You want to sell your home, and there's 79 million sellers and 69 million buyers. The market's going to go down. If you happen to invest in the stock market, there's 79 million sellers and 69 million buyers. That's going to go down. If you were looking to your pension fund, they're invested in the stock market. They're going to have to be paying out. So we're really going to have to start taking care of ourselves on a more local basis. So we talk about the implementation of this. And I want to talk about what happens when you have a checks and balances system. I'm going to describe this fairly briefly because this gets into another part. It's no longer part of the vision, but rather it's part of the detail. But it's important you know the detail's been thought out. The first part is you start out with the VillageTown vision. That is paramount. That exists in the intelligible world, not the physical, but that's what guides us all. The second thing we have are what we call the VillageTown stewards. The stewards are people around the world, of which John is one. Stuart Udall was the chairman emeritus of it. These are people who say, this is a great idea. What can I do to help? And they're networking all over the world. They don't have a specific place where they want it. They simply say, I want to help make it happen. Then the company. And the company exists to effectively start what's called the Village Organizing Company. Now, what makes that interesting is we would start one here, and it started like a developer. However, once all the properties have been sold, it takes the stock back, reissues it one per house, with voting rights of the citizens who live in that house, and then it becomes a corporation that represents you. Because what we found is corporate law is getting more and more powerful, whereas local government law, condominium law, landlord law, they're all being shackled, non-profit law. They're making them harder and harder, and yet they're giving corporations more and more power. It's called corporatism. So we said, rather than fight it, use it. And so what we create is a corporation that you own, that you elect the people to run it, and it looks very much like a normal democracy. Now, when we get to the implementation of it, you have a VillageTown coordinator, and this is a person who says we're going to do one in Northern California. That person puts together a circle of people, the VillageTown Circle, and that's what John has done here. And that's a group of people that you're invited to join, become involved in, and what it is about is building energy. That's all it is building energy, because that's so powerful to do that. Then finally, we get to the point where we're ready to do it, and you have the village coordinator, the person who says, I have a dream, I have a vision, this is what I want to do. So, we have 3 deliverables. And the 3 deliverables are how we get this done. Now, the first one is that everyone is identified before we begin. I've talked about that. The next one, if there are any local government officials, hold on to your pacemaker. All government approvals in 3 months. That's a goal. Maybe it takes a year. Okay? But what we do, it's a little like going to the moon. The first thing we do is it didn't take long to get to the moon. It sure took a lot of time to prepare to get there. We analyze what's all the downtime and circular time and say, how is it that we can eliminate that? One example, we build a historic district, which means once the shells of these buildings are built, you don't keep tearing them down and putting up new ones. Instead, what we do is we sell you a 1-story house and then say for $25,000, why don't you have 2 more floors that we don't finish? So as you earn more or need more, you can expand into it. So the expansion's internal. Now, when you do a new development, you have to write all these rules that say, what might they do? And we say, no. Here's the rules, 2 letters, N-O, historic district. And that makes them, it takes a lot of work out because suddenly there are things we're not worrying about anymore. The next one is all building constructed in 12 months. Now, think about the Olympics. Think about building major infrastructure works. This is not a house building project. We're talking about something completely different where because we have 4,000 people who want to move in and they can't afford to wait a long time, the watchmaker can't wait until everybody moves in. It all has to be done in a short period of time. We've got some of the world experts, John met one of them, I think he had a lot of fun with it, who've already done this. One guy who put up a 7-story building in 6 weeks, and when he got the contract day 1, he had no permission from the local government. He started at the beginning. Yeah. It is possible, and it's called systems. So, what can you do? Well, we basically are asking you to help us with this. Now, the books, of which these are the 2 books. This comes in both softbound and it comes in hardbound, and there's not a lot of difference in price. We recommend the hardbound. And this book is telling it, this is about how it feels. This is about a town planner of the town of Blandville who did the whole suburban sprawl from the very beginning up to the big box stores and the rest of it. And then he loses his driver's license. And he has this utter crisis as he realizes what an unbelievable mess he's made. And it starts as he sold his suburban home, his driver's picking him up to take him to a retirement village. And he has this catharsis as he points out everything he's done wrong. And then he kind of falls asleep and they stop at a VillageTown for lunch. And they invite him to take a tour. The whole rest of the book is him taking the tour. As the author, I'm taking no royalties. The publisher is taking no fees. So all of the book is going to village towns. And so we encourage you to buy them as a way to help us. And then also that you buy them when you're through with it. Don't put it on your desk, but get a little sticker that says, or take a felt tip marker and say cafe copy and leave it at your favorite one. Buy copies, give them to people, buy them by the dozen if you can. Join the Village Circle. Go to villageforum.com. Become involved, and I look forward to talking to you informally as well as taking questions. So thank you very much. Thank you.